in good shape.
Mayor, it's 6:05 p.m.
Thank you so much.
Ready when you are, Mayor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to our specially called meeting of the Mayor and Board of Trustees for the Village of Woodridge for Thursday, March 25th, 2021. The time is 6:06 p.m. We call the meeting to order and ask our clerk to please call the roll.
Trustee Hendricks,
Present.
Trustee Blair,
Present.
Trustee Martinez,
Present.
Trustee Abbott,
Present.
Trustee Krusek,
Present.
Trustee Page.
Present.
Madam Mayor,
Present.
we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We will now provide members of our public an opportunity to provide their comments on any items that either appear or do not appear on this evening's board agenda. Going to check to see if we have anyone joining us this evening.
Mayor Cunningham, we've received no written comments prior to tonight's meeting, and I'll defer to Mr. Bozak if there's anybody in the waiting room.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, we have no online registrants for the Zoom portion of the public comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for letting us know. So the purpose of this evening's specially called meeting is to receive an update on the village's facilities improvement project, specifically village staff along with the village's representatives, and they're called owners representatives, and design build contractor will be presenting an update on 1, the revised project budget, 2, updated site plan, 3, revised construction timeline, and last, construction financing options. This evening, we will not be taking a formal vote on any particular matter. However, both the board and myself will be asked to provide overall direction and feedback to our staff on the revised budget and proposed financing options and any other items that you are comfortable with this evening. So I'm going to check with our staff and see if they are ready for the presentation this evening. And we do want to thank everyone for being here again.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think staff is ready to present with our owners representatives and design build contractors. There'll be some introductions here in a moment. We've bifurcated the presentation tonight into 2 parts. One is going to be focused on the facilities project itself, what analysis and work has been done to date in terms of evaluating the site plan options, and also in terms of the overall project budget and timeline, and prepare and present to you some options with that project. And then also too, on the financing side, also some options for you in terms of how we would recommend that the board proceed with finances, which will be handled by Director Arletto. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to, is it Graham Hardwood, who's our owner's representatives with CCS.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, thank you, and very privileged to be presenting before you. And I think we've got people here, so we'll go through an introduction. Pat, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm Pat Callahan, the design lead for this design build team with Studio GC.
Graham Harwood from CCS, owner's representative.
Craig Meadows, Studio GC. Chris Kozak, Harbor Contractors. And Ryan Berry, also with Harbor Contractors.
Thank you. So we've actually met at Harbor Contractors office. We felt that everybody being in the same room, you'd have a more coordinated PowerPoint, and by having everybody here in one place. So with the introductions, I think we've developed an agenda. and this is what we'll be talking about tonight. Where we were when we last met, we'll go through that. Then we'll go through the site plans, budget review, and then finally schedule. So just to recap, we're seeking concurrence from the board on a budget and resultant site plan to proceed. Let's go back to where we were, and this was an original master plan that we had, and upon Harbour's appointment on November 19th, they started work and they commenced work utilising this master plan. As we went through it and reviewed it in detail, we discovered that there was some significant dollar increase in the budget that we were looking at. So we come back to the village and discussed the potential of it increasing significantly. And what was suggested is looking at a lot of options, looking at some other options that we could present that were not as expensive as the original master plan. Today we are going to go through our presentation, which will look at those options and look at the budget dollars associated with those options. We are still at the concept stage. We have not at this point in time moved forward with any site plan, and we're bringing those to your attention today so that we can receive direction on where we're going. We have, over the last few months, worked through numerous meetings and spent a significant amount of time developing the owner's criteria. So we've gone through an awful lot of work to get to where we are today for the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, we had an original budget of 23.5 for the construction dollars, and that was significantly looked to be significantly exceeded if we proceeded with the original master plan. So hence the development of the options. And now I'd like to turn over to Pat.
Thanks, Graham. And good evening, everyone. We're very pleased to be here tonight to talk really about the past 16 weeks worth of work that not only our team, but certainly the village staff has participated in to bring us to tonight. The slide you see simply represents kind of an amalgamation of work where we developed both the site plan looking and starting with the original master plan, but more importantly, it was infused with more zoning information, stormwater information, really development, logistics, operations, design, and constructability. We developed 17 different alternatives for the site plan. And what I want to point out, which I think is critically important, that on November 24th, which was the week after the board made the decision to advance the project forward and engage the design build team, we have worked on average 1 to 2 meetings a week during COVID. And while on one hand you may say, well, COVID is delaying the process, on the other hand, I can tell you that it's allowed us to drill in miles deep on each individual aspect of every option because we've had the time to take leave of all the various components that are influencing design. These plans also include really more detailed design for really phases 1, 2, and 3. The master plan contemplates a phase 3 for the development of public works. Well, we have to take that into consideration for the overall master plan in phase 1 to ensure that we've accounted for all the logistical challenges, operational challenges that will be necessary in order to implement that later in the site's life cycle. So for us, we've spent time kind of working from phase 3 back to phase 1 to ensure that we're anticipating the necessary changes that might result in a future development, but not only that, but also the implications it has on stormwater logistics and site operations to boot. So the development of these site plans yielded really 2 additional kind of in-depth site analyses. And that is, we've designed about 5 different public works buildings in terms of their configuration on the property, about 4 different police station, at least footprints and configurations on the property. And then also took leave to ensure that we were anticipating the phase 2 work, which was the renovation of the existing PD and Public Works facility. And we've created thus far 4 options for the redevelopment of that property. So the 16 weeks has been packed with a great deal of investment and time, which I think has yielded tonight's discussion for some options. Now, the original master plan that we received from all the previous work that the village has done was our starting point. And we started with that development as it relates to understanding the 3 real major components on the property, and that is the police building, which wants a presence on Janes Street because it is the face of the village on Janes, and then having a public works, a functional public works building kind of in between, and then a cold storage and salt storage building closest to 355 on the far east side of the property. We're calling this option 1. So as we talk tonight, we'll get into some budget numbers. We wanted to make sure that we signaled to you what each option represents. Now, I think that one of the aspects of the full development of the property takes into account, and that is how to build the police station and the public works, the police station and the cold storage building while waiting for some future development for the public works building, by taking into account site circulation, paving, stormwater detention and management, and being able to not only find a location for it on the property, but to ultimately be able to build it without or creating additional costs to the village long-term with respect to existing implementations that will be part of phase 1. So this phase is illustrated such that it would be full build out of the property by constructing the police and cold storage first, allowing enough laydown area on the east side of the property for the public works operations and activities in the near term, and then anticipating the actual public works construction right there in the middle of the site where we have the phase 2 diagram. In addition, we looked at both site circulation, having 2 ingress and egress off of Janes Avenue, one being primarily designated or intended for police use, the other being for public works use and the general public to come not only to the police facility, but if necessary to public works. That site circulation is effectively a loop. And in addition, you'll see the code compliant or zoning compliant parking as identified on the property. Next slide, please. The next slide represents our early work in developing and understanding the contours of the property. This site actually has significant fall across the property from roughly the middle of the site, both to the east and to the west, more so to the west. This image that you're looking at right now represents an individual standing on Janes Avenue looking, or standing at the southwest corner of the property on Janes Avenue, looking back towards the northeast. You'll see really 3 buildings. One in a wire frame, kind of with the sky in between, is the future public works, part of phase 2. But we wanted to understand what the representation of these vertical masses looks like during the interim prior to that construction. So you'll see the police facility, and again, this is not represented as the design. This is just represented as a vertical mass. Roughly in proportion to the square footage based on the program that we've developed together with staff. You'll see in the far back corner, the smallest object in the back corner are really 2 variations of a cold storage and salt storage building. One contemplates using a precast structure. The other contemplates using a dome structure, which many of you have seen if you drive up and down any of the expressways in Chicago. Those large vertical timber structures with shingles. We wanted to give you a flavor as to what kind of vertical height those structures would have as visible from Janes Avenue. You'll notice that the site crowns a little bit in the middle. So from Jane's, it goes up roughly to where the public works is being proposed in this particular option, and then falls to the east again, back towards I-355. In the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a smaller image. If you were standing on Jane's in the northwest corner of the parcel, you can see the police face, which would be the kind of the public face, so the mass of the public face, the public works building directly behind it in wireframe, and then in the far left-hand corner or middle left-hand of the image is the salt storage and cold storage building. So the next option, which we're calling option 3, which is a phased approach, you'll begins to reduce predominantly the earthwork and paving on the property. So by doing that, it reduces the overall costs with respect to hard surface, site work, and grading, and gives us the flexibility to make a determination as to whether stormwater management should be constructed now or later. And we'll see that a little bit later in a matrix we've developed to kind of compare the other properties. If you go to the next slide, this vertical mass for the phased approach is very similar to the previous master plan. The positioning of these facilities are in approximately the same location. This phased approach really reduces the amount of earthwork and the amount of paving that would be installed in phase 1 and in phase 1.
So on this one, Pat, we don't take any soil off, we leave it in the berm and the topsoil.
Correct. So I'm sorry, can you go back one, Craig? I missed it. My apologies. Yeah, so the idea here would be to reduce the amount of haul off and keep in context on the property the actual excavation materials that would remain, and that would be stockpiled on the back side of the property behind the future public works and in front of to the south of the salt and cold storage building. Thank you. The next option, which we are calling partial east parcel, it's a tongue twister, is our option 2. And option 2 contemplates leaving a good portion, almost a little over a third of the parcel undeveloped towards I-355. That would afford us the ability to not only limit haul off, but also limit improvements on that side of the parcel. It would, however, in this particular case, relocate the cold storage as part of phase 1 from the northeast corner of the parcel, roughly to the center of the parcel, just shy of midline, going from James Avenue to I-355. The positioning and location of the police facility in all these schemes is roughly the same. The actual location of the actual parking does change slightly, but in this case, it affords us less road development on the north, simply for public access and public parking, and then maintains a village-driven ingress and egress for police and public works related to the salt storage building located in the center of the property. Next one. So this slide represents, again, the vertical concept of masses. And again, I want to reiterate, these are not intended to be designs or design solutions. They're really intended to be masses that are proportionate to the program that we've developed. This one, you can see with the future public works for phase 2 being in the far east side of the property in the wireframe. In the center, again, we're representing this as 2 options. One, the more linear, flat horizontal in the middle for the salt and storage building. And then the dome structure in proportion, roughly what we're showing there is the other option. We're trying to evaluate the style and type of facility that would be constructed, because they have material cost implications as well as visual implications to the property itself. And then again, in the lower left-hand corner, if you were standing on the northeast or northwest corner of the property, the police station does begin to hide the salt storage dome, a little less for the more longer linear salt and storage building if it is essentially a horizontal precast, and then only a glimpse of public works as you look to the far side to the east on that location. So essentially, what I want to impart on you this evening is the depth of information that's been generated in order to really bring today's concept budget to you. Chris is going to get into detail, but with respect to the owner's criteria document, the programming documents that we've developed, not only for square foot, but also configuration, the quantities that have been developed based on our reconfiguration of the property for site improvements and detention. So Chris, I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And thank you everyone again. As part of the cost estimating portion of this phase of the project and the owner criteria, we had two major tasks. One was to review the previous conceptual budget that was developed, and the second task was to develop a current conceptual budget based on all the work that was put in with the various options and the programming of the owner's criteria document. If you want to the next slide, Craig. So the first phase of the first task of that was the previous conceptual budget. And I just, to avoid any confusion, I want to be clear, this is not the current budget. This is just the evaluation of the previous budget. You know, there are four major items with this budget. It was intended to be an objective review, but there's four major items that we noticed as comments to that original budget. You know, the first major one being the cost escalation. Again, this was just calculated using the escalation factors that were already listed on that previous budget. The next three items, the significant scope amendments, all generally relate to the shift in the program and more information available on the site. Again, we don't know all the details that went into the previous budget. We made some comparisons. The previous budget had some specific exclusions regarding unsuitable soils. You know, sometime after that budget was developed, geotechnical report was done, some soil borings were taken, and there was more information found out about that site. The soil borings did indicate the presence of unsuitable soils, predominantly, and also heavy topsoil. So we made allowances in our budget, based on some preliminary quantity estimates for that unsuitables, and we allowed the same adjustment into this budget to get a more of an apples to apples. The second major one was the site excavation. Again, not knowing all the information within those previous conceptual budgets, with more information, a topographic survey, as Pat mentioned, there is quite a bit of fall on this site. There's probably about a 30-foot grade change. So there is some significant earthwork on this project. And also there is probably an average of about 17 inches of topsoil across the site, which leads to a large amount of haul off that is figured in that master plan. So that adjustment is based on the previous budget and for the information we were able to find, had approximately $250,000 in there for the site work. With that additional information that was developed after those budgets, there's quite a bit more work to be done. And the last one is the future Public Works Phase 3 site work. The original budgets that were put together didn't really account for any of the future Public Works site work. There's a significant portion of the access roads that is included in that master plan, and just the nature of developing both ends of the project and having a building that we're going to put in the middle leads to a lot of that site work having to be included in the original phase. So once again, this is just the adjusted previous budget. It's not the current budget. If we roll into the next slide, we'll start talking about the current project budget. So the current conceptual estimates, we developed these estimates based off of the past 16 weeks worth of work of analyzing the program, looking at that and the various site options we developed. The costs are broken down in the major categories of the major construction components: the site construction costs, the police construction costs, the salt dome, cold storage, immediate repairs, construction, police and public work renovations, and then we have the other owner cost options. Now, if you look through these options, all the numbers remain consistent with the exception of the site work. That is the main focus that we're talking about, to look at a plan as we move forward. But to focus on the two biggest portions to let you know where we're at, the site work and the police construction costs. The site work, we've gone further in design than we've normally done in a owner criteria budget to help evaluate this and come up with some options for you. These costs were all generated by quantity takeoffs from the site plans and anticipated quantities using current market unit prices. So we feel very comfortable with those numbers as they're developed and where they're coming in today. And with the police station, the police station is based on a $400 square foot target budget. Now, how we came up with that, we looked at that in a couple different ways, is, first off, one thing we always look at is peer municipality review. What other police stations and what other municipalities have been, what their reported costs are for police station projects and similar, and kind of develop an average of those costs. But the second way that we did that is we took the concept floor plans that were developed, we did some building assembly costing, where we start looking at quantities of walls, perimeter walls, and assigning, portions of masonry and portions of glass, floor assembly structures, roof structures, and finish allowances, and obviously the police station taking into account the program for the detention, which is in the security areas, which is a large portion. So based on those two things and putting those together, we feel that the $400 is a good target budget. It's, it's not the high end, it's not the low end. It's a good solid middle of the road budget for similar municipalities that we've worked with and, recently completed projects. Now, once again, this is a target budget, as to allow the design team to work, we need kind of a budget to work with, but we feel comfortable that we can, design and build a police station for that. There's a lot of design decisions to be made yet. And obviously throughout that, we'll work to, reduce that budget and look for any cost saving options we can as we come through that. But, kind of need a starting point to design towards. And on the site options, as Pat mentioned, either we kind of walk through the variances of the full site development, the phase development, and the partial east parcel. And there's some additional alternates on the option 3 in the middle for the various topsoil. That's one of the cost impacts to this project is the large amount of topsoil and having to haul it off. So there is some flexibility, some cost alternates. Those are not by any means the only options on that. Those are 3 general options. They can be anywhere in between there as we go through the design phase. So again, it's looking for a, as with the building, we need a target to kind of design towards, and that's what those options are presented to you for. So after Graham walks through the owner budget a little bit, we'll kind of get into pros and cons of each one of those options.
Okay, the owner costs, what we've looked at here is the cost of obtaining the bonds. That includes issuance and legal costs. We spoke to Nadine and put a round sum in there of 300,000. There's the owner representative cost, that's CCS's cost, as per the contract, 425. Furniture allowance, we put $12.50 per square foot in for furniture allowance. It's not been decided yet whether we'll get new furniture, whether we'll reuse some or reuse all of the existing furniture. That again is just a placeholder. And then we're looking at the parking area and mailbox upgrade after the police department vacate the building, and we put an allowance in there after speaking to staff of approximately 200,000. And there are a number of other costs that we're still developing and still going through and determining. The design is basically at a very, very early stage, so some of these are very hard to ascertain. We've got permit costs, legal, signage, computers, moving costs, server, IT costs, phone system, security, AV, material testing, utility company costs. So there's a number of other items, but we put a sum of money in there to cover those. And the total that we have in there is about 1.79, which is using the experience that we've had on other projects, would seem to be a reasonable allowance, and we'll obviously develop those and look to try and get those figures to be as realistic as we possibly can as we proceed. But we're very, very early in the design stage. So, and the other thing I wanted to mention was, as Chris was going through it, we look at the contingency. The contingency we've got in there at the moment is 10%, which would be a design contingency. We're very, very early in the design, and that's the sort of percentage that you'd be looking to see. We've also got 800,000 down there as an owner contingency. That's for unforeseen conditions and for soft cost contingency and things of that nature. So that gives you an idea that these are still conceptual estimates, but we've got contingency in there to cover some unknowns that we don't know. So with that, I want to hand site development impact over to
I'll do this.
Okay.
Chris.
And here's just another representation on the various site options. You know, Pat's going to go through in a quick moment some of the pros and cons, but more of a representation. You know, the red shape represents the master plan, which is nearly developing the full site. The phase 3 approach is the same concept as the master plan. It's just starting to peel back some of the work and pushing it into the future phase 3 work. And the option 2 is a reduced site that Pat mentioned, where we're really only developing the front portion of the site and leaving the back half pretty much in its existing condition undeveloped. So Pat will kind of go through some of the additional pros and cons of these options.
Thank you, Chris. So we thought it would only be fair to you to take 16 weeks worth of work and try to assimilate it into some discussions that we had as we developed the solutions. We're only at 30 minutes, and it's hard to take 16 weeks of work and talk about it in 30 minutes. However, I think it's important to recognize that we look at these 3 options and try to come up with some logical criteria between them. So first, we looked at the original master plan. That was the targeted work that was done prior to our engagement, but we wanted to ensure that we were consistent with going back and making sure that the original intent of the master plan was consistent through our solutions. So obviously with the option 1 and option 3, we adhered to the master plan. Option 2, again, kind of takes a portion of that master plan and puts it off to the future. The second, which maximized the distance between the police department and the cold storage. The full master plan gets it further to the east. Option 3 gets it further to the east. Option 2, again, because of the lack of development on the east side, pulls it closer to the police station and directly behind. The flexibility for future public works design. By doing the work now in terms of anticipating and providing a pad for the future public works, we recognize that that does create some limitations if the project is done, 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road. We've kind of made decisions now, which makes it a little less flexible in the future without repeating or redoing some work. So in that regard, the flexibility for future changes is really offered in options 3 and 2 because of the kind of putting off the work to the future, which gives some ability for it to be impacted by future changes. Readiness for public works. The options for full site, option 1 and option 2, create pad ready work for future public works, as well as laydown areas. Option number 2 does not, because we're limiting the amount of laydown area based on the development of the salt and cold storage as targeted for that purpose only. Whereas the other 2 options contemplate, even prior to public works building being constructed, the ability for public works to leverage the utilization of that site in conjunction with the renovation of the existing facility. Minimizes impact on future escalation. Obviously, the more investment made in today's dollars saves the village costs long term. So really, option 1 gives you the best value in buying it today. Option 3 is the one that provides you the most exposure for future escalation and site work because of the undeveloped portion, as well as option 2. Minimize impact on code changes, in particular stormwater management. Stormwater codes continue to evolve and change. There have been several increases in compensatory storage, water filtering, things we need to do today different from 10 years ago. And we expect that will not change, that will actually continue to improve or increase. So development right now of the full site allows us to develop it in the context of creating the detention for the site as we would develop it today in terms of constructing the next phase of the public works facility. Whereas options, so that's for options 1 and 3, the phased approach. The partial east option, again, leaves a significant portion of the property undeveloped. By undeveloping or by leaving it undeveloped, it does leave us some exposure in the future for code changes and upgrades when that portion of the property would come into the village in a developed fashion. Allows for potential incorporation of unbudgeted work. And in that regard, we're talking about the ability for the parcel to be developed. So we have more work that we're trying to squeeze into early budgets, which the full site does and the phased approach does. The partially does not because of the undeveloped area. Removal of all excess topsoil. And again, there is a significant amount of topsoil on this parcel. Works well in options 1 and 3. And again, because of the undeveloped portion, option 2 a little less. Appearance of the undeveloped portion. Obviously, by developing it and being able to plan for its view from James Avenue, option 3 or option 2 rather is the one that doesn't give us or that limits the amount of visible change we can make because of the undeveloped parcel. And then the last piece is minimize public works views from James Avenue. Obviously, the master plan contemplated that. The phased approach contemplates that. The partial east begins to slide things to the west so we can undevelop or leave undeveloped portions to the east and thereby does not provide that minimization of the public works view from James Avenue. So the next slide is really just a recap to give you to go back to not only the site development in terms of options 1, 3, and 2, but also kind of where Chris had mentioned the current budgets are based on our analysis and our design work for each of the 3 options that we presented here, both the full site development, the phased approach, and the partial east parcel. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ryan to talk a little bit about schedule.
Thank you, Pat. Schedule obviously is an important part of this overall equation. So what we've done here, rather than putting the full project schedule up here on the slide, we just have extracted some of the key milestone dates from our schedule, and we want to talk through some of those with you. So one point I want to make is the dates that we're looking at here really are based upon the design build team receiving some form of direction on budget and site option on April 1st. So initially, we anticipated that stage transition from owner's criteria to schematic design to happen right around the 1st of February. But as we've discussed, we've taken the last 6 to 8 weeks to take a step back and prepare a couple different options for everybody to review. So that's why we're at where we're at today. So as far as the schedule goes, really from getting where we're at today to the starting point of construction, there's really 3 major components. Those are design, it's the development of the GMP, and then it's also permitting. So with our anticipated start date of April 1st for design, we anticipate the completion of the schematic design phase around the end of May. And then subsequent to that, we anticipate completing the developed design phase right around the middle of September. So the design drives a couple things, GMP development and the permitting. So as far as the GMP development goes, which is the guaranteed maximum price when we lock in the final budget for the project, we basically start that process once the developed design is complete in the middle of September. So really there's several parts to that, but to summarize it, we anticipate getting final GMP approval in December 22nd, 21, based on the schedule. So the other element to it, which is obviously another very important one, is the permitting. So once we kicked the project off, we took a pretty deep dive in conjunction with the village and identifying all the various steps, the sequencing, and the durations associated with all of the permits that were required for the project. So really, one of the major components as far as the permitting process is the site permitting. So that's why we're hoping we can get some directions on one of these 3 site options by the 1st. Really, the site permitting process, we've identified the fact that it's going to take approximately 6 months. And really, that can't happen until the civil design is essentially complete, which we anticipate to be around the middle of July. So really, what that does is we anticipate having all permits in hand by January 26th. So GMP approval is anticipated for December 22nd. The permitting we anticipate to be completed by January 26th, and notice to proceed essentially the following day, which is January 27th. So from that point, we'll start the mobilization process, but really given the weather conditions that are expected in January, February, we anticipate really getting into the ground around the middle of March of 22. So based on that anticipated start date, I've also got the completion dates here for the 3 major phases of the project. So the Public Works Storage and Salt Dome, we anticipate a completion of that phase towards the end of September of 2022. The police facility completion, we anticipate in March of 23. And the Public Works renovations, which happens after the police are in the new facility, we expect to be completed in August of 2023. So, Graham, I think you had a couple things you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Ryan. As we look at these dates here on the milestones, what's happened already is we've changed certain activities around to try and gain some time and minimize where we are at the moment. Part of that is that when we do the design, we don't stop the design, agree the GMP, and then start the design again. We're allowing for the design to continue through, and we're actually bidding, trade bidding earlier before the GMP, whereas previously it was after the GMP. So, and trade bidding would be on the design development drawings. And then obviously, once we've agreed with GMP and everything's in order, the orders will be placed on the construction drawings, which should be complete at that stage. But we've changed the sequence around and gained some time there. Permits and zoning, we've taken a very, very close look at that. And that is totally dependent on which site option we take. That whole process cannot start until we know which option we're doing. Once we know that option, then we can start the design of the site. Once we've done that, then we can start looking at zoning entitlement, sewer and water permits from the county and from the state, and of course, building permits too. But that is an extensive timeline, and it really doesn't begin to happen at all until we choose which particular site option we prefer. So that's a very important part. And then, as Ryan was talking, we should be in a position where we get notice to proceed on construction, and we have no control over the county and the state and the time frames. We've made some reasonable assessments as to what we think those time periods would be, and we've talked to people, used the experience from past projects as an indication. But we're pretty much at their will. It will be what it will be when they finally get those permits to us. So, you know, there are some unknowns in there that may have an impact on the schedule, I should say. But once we get the notice to proceed, Harbour will be looking at mobilizing. They will be looking to go down to the site, putting up a fence, moving the trailers out there, and early procurement of materials, reinforcement, long lead materials, everything of that nature will begin to happen at that point. So given everything that we've got there and kind of looking at reducing the time taken to do the police building and construction, we're looking at a March 23 date for the police building to be complete. So we've taken everything into consideration as much as we can, but there are certain factors out there that are not under our control, but we've made an assessment as to what those would be. So I think with that, that concludes our presentation. And I think where it all started was that when we looked at the original master plan and we put the numbers together for that and we looked at all the differing conditions and everything, the team raised the flag. It was a lot more than what was previously included because conditions weren't known, escalation was factored in there. We raised the flag and we're very, very conscious of dollars expended and did not want to proceed any further until we gave the board the opportunity to review, analyze, and look at the situation and make a decision as to which avenue they want to go down. So that's been the goal, to give you as much information as we can. We've gone through 16 weeks of pretty intense meetings, discussions, numerous discussions, I should say. And this is where we are, and we're at a point where we need some direction. We can proceed with keeping going, designing the police building and things of that nature, but the criticality at the moment is we can't do anything with the site plan. Therefore, we're going to be stuck with getting the permits that we need, the zoning entitlement that we need. All of those factors do not kick off, including the design of the site plan, and they impact the overall date at the end. But we've basically put a provision in here allowing for April 1st for that decision to be made. But anything that varies it, we'll obviously look at as things develop and the design progresses, we'll look at areas where we can accelerate the process. But there's no doubt we do not want to go in there, reduce the quality, take shortcuts. We understand this is your building. You're going to be living with it for a long time. We want you to have something that meets your objectives, that satisfies you and gives you a building that you're going to have and be proud of for a number of years. And we do not want to go in there and make assumptions on various options that may be out there, but we've gone through the options with staff and basically narrowed it down to 3 options of either 16 or more options, and there's a variation on
17, but who's counting?
The salt dome and cold storage has moved all over the site. It's been like a moving dot on a drawing, and you know, every option has been considered. It's been a very thorough, very thorough exercise in determining where we are and what direction we need and where we think we're going. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation.
Well, first of all, please let us thank you so much for the incredible, conscientious, diligent, thorough, and thoughtful efforts. This has been a long planning for all of us, and we truly appreciate the presentation this evening. I want to just please check with our village administrator. Do we want to take questions at this point, or?
Yes, Mayor, I would recommend we allow some time now for questions and board deliberation on the facilities project. And then after that's completed, we'll go into financing, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. So at this time, I would just on behalf of the village board, the village of Woodridge, and our entire community and our colleagues at the village, again, want to say thank you so much to all of the incredible efforts that have been put forth. And we thank you so much for presenting all of that to us. And I'm sure the 16 weeks, much has been accomplished. And I know that your efforts have been extensive and outstanding as well. Every detail, every plan, everything that you brought forth this evening. So I do want to open it up to the village board and ask for village board comment, feedback, questions that you may have, please.
Mayor,
Yes, please.
Trustee Martinez here.
Yes, Trustee Martinez, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Harbor and CCS and studio. I have a couple of questions, and it has to do with what you call a schematic design and developed design. And you kept talking about a particular date of April 1st to proceed. So would you repeat for me what you need by April 1st?
Should I go or? Well, what we need by April 1st is a selection of one of those options, which is your preferred option. Upon receipt of that option, then we can commence the design of the site plan. Until we know which option you're going to be taking, we cannot proceed with the site plan design. We can proceed with designing the police building. The cold storage and salt dome could vary according to what the location is, so there would probably be no design there. But we could proceed with the police department, and will, because we want to move this along as quickly as we can.
Okay, so I think I heard you, which is, I'm looking at the slide that you got the three options, and I'm looking at the configuration that you proposed for the police facility. I'll call it a square, okay, instead of a rectangular shape. So when you say you can proceed with the design of the police department, that means that you can start working on the details for that particular square building without really knowing what's going to happen around it from a site plan, right?
That would be true from my perspective. Pat, you're the architect.
So what we would, if we were authorized to proceed with that portion only, we would begin to complete the development of the final program, as well as the conceptual design to schematic design. We have put essentially a footprint or a placeholder on the property, and we would be limited to just the building itself without any ability to develop the entrance and exit sequences related to the site work development adjacent to it. Chris, do you have anything to add?
And the one other thing to add with that, we have the several different areas of the budget. We're looking at this as a total project budget. And throughout the project, we're going to look for cost savings in every aspect of the project, whether it's the police facility, the site work, the cold storage, the renovations. But, the one thing that would happen is if we proceeded with the police station as is, we kind of really don't know what the other part is. The site work is probably the bigger variable of costs, and it'd be nice to really get that nailed down through the design development and schematic design phases, where it'll help us understand the remaining full portion of budget. So, with the site work, what the initial plan is, once we go into some additional investigation, we have not released anybody to proceed with full grading design, because we kind of need the options. We didn't want to put the village in a spot of having to redesign several options. So we're kind of at that point of, like to further develop the site design and nail down those costs and try and develop some savings.
Okay, so just to make sure everybody on the board understands, you need by next week a decision on what option to proceed with?
Mayor Cunningham,
Yes.
if I may respond to Trustee
Yes. Oh, please.
Martinez's question.
Minister,
Yes, certainly the April 1st is the target date in which, if we don't hit that, the budget schedule starts moving. So that March date of opening the police station is going to be possibly pushed back further. So what I'm suggesting is, if there's board consensus direction tonight on one of these options, that would be great. recognizing that these are big decisions. We could come back next week if the board needed a little more time to digest the information, think about it a little bit more, or we come back with additional information. But we start pushing past April 1st, that schedule starts moving, the overall schedule.
Okay, but this is the part that I cannot understand. You could design the square box for the police department and give the board a little bit of time to review all the other options for the sidewalk. Couldn't you?
No, yeah, we can continue with the police building design, but the site plan is directly on the critical path. So we've got a little bit of latitude in time. I mean, this is a very important decision.
I understand it is.
Yeah, you know, and if you feel that you need a little bit more time, and that we come out with a decision, then, you know, that's the decision you must make. And you may lose some time. We will look at other options in an attempt to try and reduce the effect of that. But the bottom line is that at the moment, the designers can't do any design on the site plan at all. And that means that the overall impacts of getting the necessary zoning entitlement, the sewer and water permits, et cetera, all which follow and seem to have a lengthy time, impact the overall construction at the end of the day. They delay it. But to be honest, you look at the size of the decision, look at where you are. We've put a nominal date in as April 1st and taken everything from there at the moment. If the date varies by a few days, I think we can probably make that up quite easily. But anything significantly more has a direct impact on the completion.
Could you go back to the schedule slide, please? So you got schematic design by May 26th. Completion.
Yeah.
That's based on an April 1st decision. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then the developed design completion, which is 4 months later, more or less. What's incorporated into that?
So the schematic design takes our conceptual design and creates an actual floor plan and the start of building elevations, et cetera. And more importantly, it creates the baseline site development based on the requirements of both zoning, landscaping, stormwater management, et cetera, to begin to lace the build or set the building onto the property and understand the impact. The developed design is our final design phase prior to preparing construction drawings. However, the site work has a different track of completion than the actual building designs. So that's the part that is, as Graham mentioned, is on the critical path.
And that's included as part of the developed design completion.
Correct. The site permitting and zoning entitlements are targeted for July.
Yeah, so one key date that's not indicated on this slide here is the completion of the civil design, which is all the site design. With the 4/1 start date, we anticipate that completion to be on July 15th, which
Okay.
July 15th which triggers then the site permitting process.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Martinez.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, please, Trustee Page.
I have a question regarding option 2. What are the negatives of moving the salt storage dome, other than cosmetic, closer to the police station?
So that option not only relocates the salt storage, it also shifts lay down areas or else support areas. But I think it might be more beneficial if Chris or someone from the village addresses its impact potentially on operations.
Can you go back to the bigger map of option 2?
Certainly.
Thank you. There we go. Director Bethel, do you have a thought on the salt storage dome being closer to the police facility?
Hi, Trustee Page. Sorry, I thought Pat, when he was saying Chris, he was referring to Chris on his team. We got 2 Chris's in the meeting here. I think one of the issues and kind of what was going hand in hand with the master plan is there are some operations, while necessary to kind of serve the community, are those that we try to kind of place perhaps farther away. And so right now we've got some things that are happening at the county's facility on Route 53, be it spoil disposal, staging of materials, off hours operations. And so the goal was trying to place those closer to 355, who's a neighbor that we wouldn't necessarily negatively impact. So you're bringing some of those operations closer to the front of the building. And so while we keep talking about salt, it is the spoil, it's the trucks, it's the beeping, and the larger equipment that's also going to be operating there as well.
Thank you. And one more question regarding option, sorry, I write notes in crazy angles. Option 3 is basically the only difference between the master plan and option 1 and option 3, less parking. Less pave. I think you all use the word less pavement.
Well, it's less pavement and leaving some of the earthwork or spoils on the property in the form of berms. So it's less site work and less hard surface in that would be constructed in phase 1.
And if you look closely on the plan, you can actually see the dashed lines on there. It's the exact same plan, just peeling back some of the work in phases. And those 2 white shapes that we have on there are the potential for leaving topsoil on the site, which is one of the big cost impacts. So if you look at the bottom of the cost spreadsheet, there was some 3 deductive alternates to haul off or to keep some of that soil on site. So it gives you some flexibility with that option. And another flexible thing about this option is, it allows for alternates in the bidding process. Some of the work that is not shown on there as being completed in this phase could easily be bid as an alternate of the bid process, and a decision could be made later on at that time.
In regards to the stockpile of topsoil, other than cosmetic, is there any negative effect?
Other than, future costs of removing it later in the next phases, kind of saving some of the escalation.
Thank you.
And the difference between option 3 was
I'm going to interject a question here just as a follow-up. Do we happen to have a side-by-side comparison of all 3 site plans? Just curious if we have that.
Diagram?
that's
Close one.
yeah, that's probably the closest we
Okay,
have.
that's good. Thank you. I just wanted to check something. Thank you so much. And thank
Madam Mayor,
Yes, please, Trustee Blair.
just to follow up on Trustee Page. My understanding, the difference between 1 and 3 is to delay work that has to be done eventually. Do we know how much additional cost the delay is going to cost the village? I mean, right now you're looking at it, it's roughly $1 million right now. How much more will that $1 million be if that work is delayed 2, 3, 4, 5 years? How much more is it going to cost the village?
Now, we can't fully predict escalation, but I mean, it could be assumed probably 5% a year.
Okay.
For what we use as an average.
But that doesn't take into consideration interest rates if they should go up, correct?
Right. That would just be purely construction costs.
Okay. And then just a comment on option 2. I would hate for us to be really short-sighted on option 2. We're kind of limiting ourselves. We have all this wonderful land. And personally, okay, we don't know what the needs are going to be 5, 10, 15 years from now. And by putting that salt dome right in the middle there, are we not limiting ourselves to expansion, growth, perhaps future needs? I'm not even talking cosmetics. When the current building was built, the plan was to have a second story. That was put off, and they were going to put a second story on. Well, requirements changed. The building didn't meet the requirements, and they could not put that second story on. Now, had the second story been put on to begin with, it would have been there. I just don't want us to get in. I want us to learn from history, that's my thought on option 2. I just think we have all this wonderful land, and I'm not even talking cosmetics. We're just sticking this dome right in the middle where potentially we may need that property for some sort of expansion or something in the future.
Thank you, Trustee Blair.
Madam Mayor, I mean to ask one more question. Well, you got that slide up of the 3 options.
Yes.
On option 1, are you including paving the entire site?
Yeah, can you do that? We're going to pull up the larger plan just to make sure we're all clear.
Well, okay, so here it is. I'm looking at the east side next to the public works, between the public works and the salt storage area. That's a huge area that seems to be asphalted.
So
Are you planning on doing that work now?
This plan contemplates, you'll see a dashed red line around the white Public Works building that says Phase 2. So there is a small portion of parking on the north and the south side, and the adjacent paving. But the idea would be that adjacent to salt storage, closer to 355, that we would develop the laydown areas and the current areas for Public Works use that are not represented in the current form on the current property with respect to storage of materials, equipment, and spoils.
So the answer to my question is you're planning on paving that space?
Yes.
Okay, so what if we don't pave it? I mean, assuming that option 1 is the right direction to go, where do we find potential savings to minimize the cost? I don't see the need to pave that whole area.
Well, that's partially why we developed option 3, because it reduces the scope of option 1. However, all of these options, and maybe I should clarify this, all of these options provide for opportunities to have alternates, either to reduce or add back in any elements we're discussing this evening.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Going to open it up to anyone else, please, with any questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, please.
It's Director Bethel. If I could make just maybe a couple of additional comments. The first, and Trustee Blair, when you mentioned kind of history, I think that was a very insightful comment. For some context, the Public Works and operations as far as outdoor storage material use actually used to be on 83rd Street, right near Sipley School, after the previous buildings had been taken down. And it was something kind of with the storage there, which was a little bit more public, it became an issue in terms of noise and odor. And so we ended up shifting, and that's how we ended up at the county facility. But kind of the goal of hiding stuff here next to 355, that was maybe one of those experiences that we thought long-term probably puts us in a better position and does leave that middle area open. That topsoil being retained on site, and I think that was one of the common themes, and Trustee Martinez, what you were getting at is how can you reduce costs? And so it was a creative way that Chris Kozak and some of the staff there had said, if you have good soil and you can retain some of that, we'll use that in public works operations for restoration on digs, et cetera, and can start to eat into that pile where we're saving money on material purchases and not having to pay to haul off. Similarly, just given kind of the gift of time, there are sometimes developments that are in need of topsoil. And so the ability to have that where somebody else would perhaps be willing to, they don't have to pay the material, they would pay that hauling cost, where again, long-term could save some dollars. And then regarding that additional paved area, again, the police and public works needs are very different. Public works, it's really yard space, and then long-term it's material equipment type storage. And so the goal there was to create some working yard space with that paved area, storage of raw materials that we use in our operations, but again can be cut down, shifted, and otherwise whatever we need to do to try to reduce those expenses, based on the ultimate goal the mayor and the board want to get to.
But again, Director Bethel, looking at the options, if I look at option 1 and option 3, assuming that we wanted to keep topsoil, you're not getting that parking area that you're talking about just south of the salt storage area. You have a very much smaller space than you have under option 1. So do you need all that space under option 1, or is it just the fact that it makes sense to just do it?
And absolutely. So there is less space there. And again, at this stage being conceptual, it's kind of paving that area versus how do you work with a smaller area and save some of the topsoil. The other issue is kind of circulation. Obviously, there's only one roadway in.
Yeah.
So again, but that's a give and take of you can save some money on the paving, and you work with kind of that one road in and out for deliveries and other operations.
Okay, thanks.
Madam Mayor, I have sorry. Go ahead, Trustee.
Go ahead, Trustee Page.
I have a question for the chief. Does going along or following up on what Director Bethel said, does the one-way in and out affect operations at all? If we were to choose option 3?
Right. Trustee Page, we spent a lot of time talking about that. And we would have options and enough room to get out if we needed to. We felt pretty confident that if we went with that option, we would be able to manage, short of having an accident right in the entrance there. But that would be a rarity, I would think. So.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, please. Trustee Krusek.
Sort of along the lines of what Trustee Page was just talking about, that was going to be part of my question was to the chief, but then the other part is to Chris. So option 3 has all of the public works vehicles going in what would be considered the public entrance on the north, correct?
Which Chris are you referring to?
Chris Bethel.
Director Bethel.
Director Bethel, sorry.
That's correct.
Okay, so they would be basically coming in and out with the public, as opposed to if option 1, you're coming around the south side.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Going to go ahead and open it up again and ask if there's any other comments or questions at this time, feedback.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please, Trustee.
I guess I'm just concerned about obviously this is extremely expensive. Over the last 2 years, we're averaging a deficit in the general fund of about $100,000, $25,000 a week. We're in the red. We're talking about spending $30 million after bonds are paid off. We're looking at over $40 million. And I'm trying to figure out why this building has to be twice the size of the current building. And I know we've talked about in the past. I understand that we need more room for evidence preservation. I understand there's ADA regulations for hallway size and bathrooms and things of that sort. But I can't believe that, we're going to go from 20,000 square foot that we have to go to 40,000 to be a good functional building for the police department. Again, I've raised this concern in the past, and maybe this horse has already left the barn. But at $400 a square foot, I mean, why would it be insufficient for us to go from 20,000 square foot to 30,000 square foot? If we did that, we'd save $4 million right there. And again, I'm not trying to rehash things that have already been decided. I thought it was always on the table, the size of the building. I'm looking at option 1, 2, and 3, and that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like it's a done deal, and maybe my memory is just missing something. But again, this in light of our current situation financially in the village, and we don't even have a plan to address the systemic shortfalls. And we're spending money here I know the federal government can print money, but we can't. This is coming from our taxpayers. And I just think we have to be as careful as we can. And, I'd love to build a huge building for the police, but you know what, at some point you're constrained by what you can afford. And to me, this building is excessively large. It doesn't need to be twice the size of the current building. And, we need to do something to bring the cost down. I mean, the other questions from some of my colleagues have indicated that they're not entirely comfortable with these numbers, and I don't blame them. I'm not either. So again, I don't know if there's any, if Chief or anybody can give me a good reason why it has to be double the size.
Thank you, Trustee Abbott. Let me just please clarify, and if our administrator could please assist me. The building that is being proposed, what is the actual square footage going to be?
Sure. So the actual proposed square footage is 32,000 square feet. The board will probably recall when we were considering a potential IGA with the county for the traffic court, we were figuring more about 36,000, 35,000 square feet, right? Well, we've certainly, without that particular scope in the project, we've pared that back to 32,000. I will ask Chief Cunningham to further respond, if I may, Mayor, because I know he's done a lot of work with his team. He's visited probably a half a dozen police stations and has done a lot of work in terms of drilling down to the programming with GC Studio and even in prior space needs studies.
And then if I could just prior to that, what is the current police department? I know it's the shared space, et cetera, but
it's a little over 17,000, but then there's about 2,000 or so shared space with Public Works.
okay, thank you. At least we can go ahead and put that out on the record for everyone. And yes, I think it would be helpful if our chief would share with us. I know the extensive work and everything that has been done and that he has been leading. So I think that could be very helpful, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks for the question, Trustee Abbott. It's something we spent a lot of time considering. When we talk about site visits, not only me, but Sergeant Brinkman, and every time we went to a building, a new police building, we brought other people with us that work with us. And we went to large buildings, we went to medium-sized buildings, and we went to a lot of departments that were kind of right our size. And when you talk about our space needs studies back in 2009, we came up with 37,000 square feet. In 2015, the space needs program said it was 40,000 square feet. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty high. Let's look at what we actually need. And as we went through these buildings, we looked at what was nice to have and what do we actually need. And I think we came up with a good number square footage wise of what we actually need. And the biggest square footed properties, the pieces are shared space, right? We have a community room that's going to double as an EOC. A lot of these departments will have an EOC separate from the community room. And that room also doubles as a training room as well. Right now, we don't have the ability to train. Moving forward, we want to do some more training. Not only if we host training, we get free training. We haven't been able to do that in years. A lot of these departments do separate rooms for each one. We did a combined kind of effort in that way. Moving forward, our shared space that we need to do is we have to have a fitness room. We have to have a defensive tactics room. Moving forward with all the police reforms, that's going to be a huge requirement for us. We're starting a new program for defensive tactics that we can't even do it on site. We're going to have to look for off-site space to actually do the training that we need to do. So as far as the question, is it large in comparison to other departments? If you look at Lyle is they have a smaller department than us. They're at 38,000 square feet. One of the departments I looked at was Glen Ellen. They're right around 30. New Lenox, right around 32,000. And when I looked at those departments, I thought, okay, this is exactly what we need. We're right in the wheelhouse of where we need to be. So we felt very comfortable that we're not looking at anything excessive, but it's actually the space that we would actually need. And we're using different rooms, for multiple uses to save space.
Chief, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
When was the most recent police department built? Was it any of the ones that you just mentioned?
Glen Ellen probably was one of the most recent ones.
Okay. Do we know when that one was built? Because I'm remembering it being built, so I know it is pretty recent, but I don't remember when.
2017, I believe, right? Is that true, Al? Yeah, there's actually Oswego is 2018. There's actually a bunch of them in 2018. Arlington Heights is 2018. Carroll Streams is 2018. Bartlett is 2018. Those are all much bigger than what we're looking for. Oswego is 69,000 square feet. St. Charles is 56. Bartlett is 42. Carroll Stream is 69.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Chief, just so you know, we pulled up a slide that shows a comparison that we had done to other municipalities.
Thank you very much.
One additional comment, Chief, to add, the current program that we have developed with you is smaller than the original proposed prior to us starting our work.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
And Madam Mayor?
Yes, please,
I
Trustee.
apologize for giving wrong information there. I misread an email from Administrator Stonich. It said 40,000 square foot, and I thought that was what this building was supposed to be, when it turns out that was a 2015 projection. So I apologize for misstating those numbers.
Thank you very much. And just wanted to clarify for the record, okay? All right, thank you. Any other questions or feedback or comments at this time? Thank everyone very much. We'll go ahead, Administrator Stonich, and we can move on, please.
Yes, Mayor, we'll transition to Director Arletto on the financing portion of tonight's presentation, and she's joined by our financial advisors, Spear, and Anthony Maselli, I believe, is in attendance as well.
Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Madam Mayor and the Board of Trustees. Before I start, I do want to introduce Anthony Maselli. He is from Spear. They are our long-term financial advisors. For several years now, he has really worked on, he's just been wonderful. He's run so many different scenarios for us as we've worked through this project and developed it, right? And so he has been right with us tonight as well. He worked closely with us in putting together what we think is our best approach at this time for financing. He's prepared the bond financing models that we're going to review tonight, and he is also here to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Let me please just, on behalf of the Village Board and the Village of Woodridge, welcome Anthony and thank him very much for all the excellent efforts, again, along with just an amazing team throughout. So we welcome you and thank you very much for being here this evening.
Oh, my pleasure.
Very good. Thank you. So tonight, what we plan to do is review the financing to pay for the three options that were presented. And what you'll see is really the ending fund balance is going to vary because the total project cost varies, right? However, What you will see is that the Capital Projects Fund will be able to support the costs of the project over the next 10 years under any of these three options. When we look at interest rates right now on bonds, they have come up slightly from the beginning of the year, but they still remain extremely attractive. Rates right now are hovering around 2.5%. For purposes of tonight's modeling, they range just slightly between 2.73 and 2.76%. That allows for a 20 basis point uptick in the rates over the next couple months, should that happen. So it's a little bit of a buffer for us. We do recommend at this time to take advantage of the favorable bond market if we can. However, right now we're in that concept budget phase. And so because these are not hard numbers yet, it really necessitates the need to do 2 bond issues instead of just 1. We don't want to over issue the bonds because we're issuing bonds for a very specific purpose. And so we want to make sure that we want to get as close as we can to that actual amount, but we don't want to go over because then we have some issues of we have too much money and we can't spend it. And so the thoughts right now are that we're going to issue the majority of the project costs now in 2021 while the rates are low. And that will be our long-term debt issuance. And there will be a 25-year bond. And then we'd have a smaller issue either at the end of 2022, which we're presenting tonight, or 2023, depending on the timing of the project. And that would be our 10-year issue. And so by that, and that will be our short-term bonds. By that, it allows us a little bit more flexibility in that one, and we could look to even do a private bank placement as what we did with that $5 million that we did in 2019, as you'll recall. We have bond proceeds that will be invested. So once we receive them, and as you could tell by the project schedule, we wouldn't be spending them right away. We can invest them and they would earn interest until we do use them, although the interest rates right now are extremely low, but at least it's something. And then we also have the potential to transfer funds. Now, you may hear that we have some COVID stimulus at 1.9 trillion. I think that they've earmarked some for municipalities. We don't have final guidance on exactly all the things that we can use those dollars for, but we do understand that there is a component for revenue replacement. And so we've run really very, very rough estimates right now because we're not sure if all the revenues would be replaced or if we can only replace tax revenue that we've lost, and they'd be looking from 2019 compared to 2020. And so we have a rough estimate of about $1.3 million. And so if we have that and we can revenue replace the lost revenues in the general fund, that does free up potentially some additional dollars in that general fund if the board wanted to choose to move that over to the Capital Projects Fund to help assist pay for this project. So here I have just a basic timeline just to give you a sense of how it would play out if the board is in favor of moving forward with financing, and whether this happens now or if the board doesn't want to go forward. The basis of this, it's really about a 2 to 3 month process. And so I'm going to just say right now I have it laid out as if the board would want to move forward now. And so if that happens, the beginning in about mid-April, SPEAR would be sending out a request to the bond rating agencies so that we could be rated. They would also be responsible for distributing a preliminary official statement for all the parties to review and edit. This would also include our bond counsel, which would be Chapman and Cutler. Then towards the end of April, they would issue a draft bond ordinance for us to review. Then we move into early May, and SPEAR will make any changes to the preliminary official statement that they receive from all of our comments and edits. And then we would have the bond ratings call with the bond rating agencies. And then we think that would also probably be a really good time to update the village board on what the market looks like. And so that's getting a little bit closer to our issuance, and we can just kind of keep a track on that and keep you updated. Then we're looking about a little bit later in May, we would receive our bond ratings from the agencies, and then SPEAR is setting out to prepare our finalized official statement that will be used for the issue. Then we have right now, June 3rd, that we would bring the bond ordinance to the board for approval. And then if we get approval, SPEAR would then post that preliminary official statement. They'd hold a bond sale on or about, somewhere around June 21st. And then approximately 2 weeks later would be the bond closing. And so we'd be looking at roughly at about the beginning of July for that. Then we'd receive our dollars. And of course, then, as I mentioned earlier, we would invest them until such time that they'd be needed. So are there any questions on this before I move into kind of talking about the financing of the 3 options that we have?
Thank you, Director Arletto. Please let me open it up to the village board and ask if there's any comments or questions. Okay, not hearing any. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mayor. Okay, so this is option one. We talked about that's the full site development. It just has updated budget costs. So I put together this chart here really just to kind of let you know that we have about $1.5 million left in the original bond issue. So you remember back in 2019, we issued $5 million for the acquisition of land. And so we have about 1.5 million left there. And so we obviously will use that to the remaining costs of the project. And then in the middle here, you see these are the design and construction costs mirroring from what Harbor presented earlier today. And we have a total cost of that project of about $30.6 million. And so when we take that 1.5 and we subtract the 30.6 million, I have a deficit of about $29 million. But then you're going to remember that as we have been presenting all these scenarios in the Capital Projects Fund, that the board had some discussion about using about $3.1 million of reserves of the Capital Projects Fund to pay for the improvements and repairs to One Plaza Drive. And so these bottom two line items here for One Plaza Drive total about $3.1 million. If we use the reserves, we don't have to bond for that. So it drops the amount of bonding that we need to just under 26 million. And so under this scenario, option one, we'd be looking at a $26 million bond issue. Okay, so here Spear has put together a very nice bond model for us to take a look at. And what you see here is the first column is going to include those 2019 bonds. And they're included here because they're part of the total cost of the project. The middle column here, you'd be looking at what we're recommending to do this year in 2021. And then the last column would be our follow-up bond issue at the end of 2022. And then we have the total debt service in this gray column here. And so because we need 26 million and we want to take much advantage, as I mentioned earlier, of the good interest rates that we have, we're proposing to issue $18 million in bonds this year here, which would be in the middle column. And then remaining based on a $26 million project, we'd have a remaining $8 million to do in 2022. Now the $18 million in bonds this year, those, as I mentioned, would be our long-term bonds. You see that they go out for 25 years. And then our 2022 bonds are our short bonds that are spanning about 10 to 11 years here. You'll see here that the assumed interest rate is at 2.76% for the 2021 bonds and then 2.13 for our 2022 bonds. And you'll also notice when you're looking at 2021 that we only make interest payments all the way through until 2034. And I'll explain a little bit why we think that that's a good reason. We've set this structure for several reasons. First, typically the interest rates are higher at the end of long-term bonds, right? And that's because really the issuer is carrying more risk when we go out for 25 years as opposed to 10 years. And so since interest rates are low and we're borrowing a large amount of money, we're going to make this our 25-year issuance and then have those, principal payments done towards the end of that 25 years. So we pay interest over here because we've taken out the bond issue. And I'll tell you why we kind of structure it this way. And then by doing so and taking out so much and taking it out in the long term, it allows us more flexibility in our 2022 issue. So we have a much lower amount here. It's $8 million. Obviously, we're only going to go out for about 10 or 11 years. So those have to be the short bonds and then possibly be able to do a bank placement here. And typically shorter bonds will be a better interest rate. And so we're trying to play the market maybe a little bit and get the best out of the market interest rate that we can under both scenarios. So you see here also that the reason we only structure this as debt service only is because this last column here in the gray, that's our annual debt service. And so you can see it's basically level. And so by being able to have level debt service, it's much easier to budget for. We don't have these great fluctuations up and down. And so by structuring it this way, we feel at least that this is the best option right overall for all instances with both bond issues like this. If we look to see how this impacts, here's our Capital Projects Fund 10-year projection. You've seen this layout has, I've been using this layout now for I think that at least the last several meetings that we've had. And so I just want to orientate you a little bit to this. If you look here in the second column, that's our 2020 preliminaries. And so our year ended The auditors are actually out now doing their audit. So we have closed the year and done our accruals. And so these are fairly good numbers, but they haven't been audited yet. And so based off of 2020 preliminary, we're looking at an ending fund balance of about 14.3 or almost $14.4 million. If you look up here in the revenue section, I do have two lines that are highlighted yellow. You'll recall that the TIF, which closed, we had a distribution of $325,000. We're going to use that to help to fund the project. And so I have that here as revenue coming in. Actually, we transferred it this past year. And then we're also looking to take $600,000 in federal drug enforcement funds that are eligible to support the project as well. And so we have that coming into this fund in this year, actually. And then when we look down on the expenditure side here, you see that we have really highlighted here, I have all of our debt service. And so, and also the 3.1 million, I have that in 2023. It's in a lump sum. More likely it would obviously be used over the course of the project as expenses come up for phase one, but it's just easier to allocate it here for illustrative purposes. We have the debt service on the Pine Ridge. You notice that this is the last year, so it's going to free up about $670,000 into this fund beginning next year. We have our 44-acre site. Those go all the way until 2033. So just 3 more years after this, and then what they'll do is they free up an extra, oh, I'm sorry, 44 acres. So I have that wrong, 44 acres. Sorry, let me move it, my sign. Yeah, they do go to 2033, my apologies. They free up about $570,000 annually. The reason we have $1.1 million here is that we share 50% of the costs with the Park District, but the savings to us would be $570,000 because we won't have that other side as a revenue from the Park District going forward. Then we have our bonds for the new project and then the use of those reserves. And so we believe that we have conservatively estimated our revenues in this fund. The main revenues here that we have are sales taxes and income taxes. Right now, as you know, in January, we had new legislation take effect, which is called Level the Playing Field, that implemented in January. And what that does is allow for the collection of sales tax, state sales tax and home rule sales tax. Right now, the state sales tax was being collected on online sales, but it was coming to us on use tax, which is based off of population or per capita. That's now switched over to actual sales tax. And so when a Woodridge resident will buy something out of state, will receive the share of 1% of our state sales tax. We'll also receive the home rule sales tax of 0.75%. And then if someone in Woodridge buys something and the building is in Illinois and is in Woodridge, will also receive the share of those taxes. And so we've conservatively, at least we think we've conservatively estimated an increase in our sales taxes going out beginning in this year and moving up a little bit each year. We will start seeing some of the revenues actually come in this month and moving forward. So a little bit later in the year, I believe that we'll have a little better sense of where those revenues lead us. And we'll come back to the board with revised schedules. But looking here at the 10 years mark at this first option, which is our most expensive option, we're looking at roughly a fund balance of about $3.7 million. Okay, let me move into option 2 now. This is our partial east parcel with no spoil removal. And here is the same spreadsheet that you saw before. We have that $1.5 million. Here, the project cost is concept budget at $27.2 million. And so that leaves us with $25 million short. If we use our reserves of $3.1 million, we have a need then to bond under this option of about $23 million. Here's our bond schedule that we're taking a look at, same structure. We have our 19 bonds here. Again, here we're looking to bond 18 million in 2021, and then with the remaining 5 million in 2022. When we take a look at that all together, our debt service here is about $1.5 million. So before it was 1.7, and now we've dropped it down a couple $100,000 each year annually for the life of the bonds because we're bonding less. And here's the impact that we see in the capital projects fund. And so all things stay the same, except the fact that we have lower debt service. And by the effect of lower debt service, we have at the end of 10 years, $4.9 million in the capital projects fund. We're looking here at option 3. Those are our phased development that they spoke of earlier. Same chart that I have here with that 1.5 million being counted. Here, the total cost is 29.3 million. So we would be short just under 28 million. Here we're using our reserves again. So the need to bond in this situation would be $25 million. Looking at a $25 million bond issue, again, we're looking to do 18 million. So really what's fluctuating here is our third year bonds that we're going to do in 2022. And the less we have to bond, obviously, then the less that we're going to pay in debt service there. So under this here, because it's a little bit higher than the partial east, bonding, the debt service is about 1.6 million or just under 1.7 million annually. So it's kind of incrementally. We go from 1.7 million all the way down to 1.5 million, depending on the choice of the option that you want to take. Impact here in the capital projects fund, we end in 10 years. Again, all stays the same except for the change in the debt service. We end ending fund balance at 4.1, just under 4.2. That compares to, again, 3.7 million. That was the lowest we have because that project was the most expensive under option 1. And option 2, which was the partial east, that was the highest fund balance that we would have at 4.9 million. And here we have 4.2. So other thing I wanted to bring to the board for consideration tonight is because the rates are attractive for bonding, there is, instead of something for the board to consider, is not using that 3.1 million in reserves and saving that either to shore up the fund balance or to use for projects, additional different projects. And so we could roll that additional 3.1 million into the debt service. And by doing so, the cost using the estimates that we have right now of about 2.76% would cost about $1 million over the life of the loan, but it does save the fund 2.1 million. So it's really how the board would like to look at it. If they feel that they need to have more fund balance, this might be an option that they would like to take advantage of. Ideally, it would be nice to know if you would decide something like that now, because if we don't decide it before we issue, that would just be added to the increase, and it would increase the amount that we need to bond in 2022. Certainly something we could do, and it will depend on what option you take as well. Just really wanted to bring that to your attention as an option that you could do. And so I wanted to put together kind of a schedule so you could see what the impact that has on the ending fund balance by doing this. Now this is option, I called it option 1A because we're looking at the full development model. And so based off of that, we'd have to bond 29 million instead of the $26 million. And so by doing that, I would need to, oh, I think I might have going the wrong way. Sorry. Here's option 1A, full development. And so you can see here we need to bond the $29 million, and we have total debt service then instead of that 1.7 million going up to just about 1.9 million. So about $200,000 annually to do that. But the impact that you will see here in the capital projects fund is that at the end of 10 years, we free up more dollars. And so instead of having $3.7 million at the end of 10 years, we have 5.5 million. So it's a little bit more of a fund balance. Now, one thing I do want to point out in all of these, the projections for one, right, for going 10 years. And when we're looking at the capital projects expenses, we have currently the 5-year capital plan. And so those are actual what we are anticipating to spend over the next 5 years in the capital project. And then in the out years, beginning in 2026 to 2030, that's an estimate that we used off of historical, and it's on the high side, and it's purposely on the high side because it didn't want to underestimate what we might use in any given year and then have you fall short when we're in those out years. And so while it's not likely we would spend 1.8 million and I'll have it escalating for inflation, I wanted to put that in there just to show that in fact, we could, even if we did spend that much every year, still afford this project under here. And so even at the lowest amount, we're at 3.7 million. If you decide to bond for all of it and free up some money, we're at 5.5 million in fund balance. And I showed one other one too, and that would be option 2 or option 3A, sorry, and that's looking at that phased approach. And under this one here, we would have a $26 million bond issue. And you'll recall that under our phase two, the partial approach, that was $26 million that we were going to need. So this looks exactly the same as that other, because the bond amount that we need to bond is the same. What really it does, so we're looking at $1.7 million on an annual debt service. But what that really does is the bottom line that we see after 10 years in our capital projects fund. And so under this one here, it's $6.8 million. And so if you decide to go at a lower option, I'm just showing you the difference in the fund balance here, but something for the board to consider. And so here I've just provided a summary slide with all the options. You have options 1, 2, 3 at the top here, which mirror what was presented tonight. And then those are option 1A and 3A, which says if you'd like to also roll in that 3.1 million in reserves. And so you could take a look here to help aid in your discussion along with the budgeting slides that they had from Harbor and CCS. And that concludes my presentation at this time, Mayor. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Leto. I would like to open it up to my fellow board members and ask for any questions that you may have, feedback, comments. So if we have anyone with any questions, please.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please, Trustee Page.
Director Leto, thank you for the presentation. Question for you. The water fund has a minimum requirement of 25% in reserves. Does this fund have that type of requirement?
It does not. It's a capital projects fund, so there are no fund balance requirements. Really, the requirement is to have sufficient funds to pay for capital projects for future and current.
And this might not be a question for you. This might be for Director Bethel. What is the life of this building? We know our current building has exceeded its useful life. What is the projected life of the new police station or the new public works building?
I would probably defer to Harbor and Studio GC and what they've seen elsewhere. But I think generally, 50 years is used, but you have a lot of items like roof, mechanicals, other things that have to be replaced, far before then. But again, I don't know if that Studio GC Harbor team, if you've got some insight to share for Director or Board Member Page.
Typically for public works projects, we estimate our life cycle costing on a 40 to 50 year analysis. There are obviously things that need to happen in order to achieve that life of a building, which would include, improvements to roofing after 20 years, et cetera, improvement to exterior envelopes, interior HVAC systems, et cetera. So, but generally speaking, when we predict the life of public works facilities, not just public works, meaning actual physically public works, but public projects. Generally speaking, we use a 40 to 50 year life cycle.
Thank you.
Any other board comments, questions, feedback? Okay, I'm not hearing anyone, so we will go ahead. But before we go, Director Leto, please know our deepest appreciation for your ongoing work in this area. I know we have worked extensively on this for years now. Your presentation this evening, extremely thorough, all the detailed information, and just incredible good works. We thank you very much on behalf of our community and each of our board members. So at this time, if there's nothing further on the financing, I'm going to ask that each board member please provide your input on the facility project options. So we have the option 1, 2, 3, and then 1A and 3A. And thank you very much for that slide. It is excellent. Truly appreciate that. So that way we can go through which option and then Secondly, what financing option? Okay, so everything should be on the screen, but please also, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate. So I'm going to go ahead and start with, well, let me ask, is anyone prepared to provide your direction at this time?
Madam Mayor,
Yes, please, Trustee Hendricks.
I think after reviewing or listening to the presentations, I would support option one, the full development. And in regards to the payment portion, my screen, I'm kind of, let me see.
That's okay.
If you should, Trustee Hendricks, if I could, it would either be option one or option 1A if you wanted to roll in the 3.1 million in reserves. That would be the difference if you're in support of option one.
Okay.
So 1A looks at 100% of the project being the bond issuance. So going to 29 million, I believe.
That's correct.
Okay.
Correct. And then it's really the difference in ending fund balance. Then you just have a little bit more. Instead of 3.7 at the end of 10 years, you'd have 5.5.
Okay.
But the cost to that, there is an interest cost because you are borrowing more money. So.
And you said it's approximately $200,000 a year?
It is. And so it's about $1 million to borrow an additional 3.1. So you really, the net effect is adding 2.1 million in reserves that you wouldn't be spending.
Thank you.
And I mean, in regards to finance, I mean, you tell me what the better option is. I mean, it's difficult to.
It is.
When you're not in the industry to kind of know which one is the better approach. So Nadine, I would kind of defer to you on your recommendation.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Trustee. And it really doesn't have to be decided tonight on what you need to do, because we're going to go with as much as if the board will support option one or whatever option they support, if they will allow us to try to put as much as we can in the original bond issue and allow that 2022 to have that short-term bond with kind of the leftover project in 20 at the end of the year in 2022. And then we can kind of take a look and see where we're at with the project when it develops, because this is still concept budget costs. And then we can have a little bit better sense of what we're dealing with. Also, we'll have a little bit of better sense of what kind of revenues we're seeing from sales taxes. And so maybe that's not something that needs to be decided tonight. Maybe we come back to the board. And if you pick that option, and we'll help direct on what we feel would be the best way to go.
Okay, I like that approach. So tonight I'll just go ahead and say I support option one.
Perfect.
And we'll determine financing later.
Thank you very much, Trustee Hendricks.
Mayor?
Yes, please, Trustee Martinez.
All right. I also support option one, but I'd like to put a little wrinkle into it if I can. And this is for the benefit or for a question to Harbor or our owner's rep. I still like the concept that option three brought of having that additional soil kept for future use by the polyworks or whatever other needs we had. And I like to consider, because of option one does have the southern driveway, I like the idea of having two driveways, one on the north, one on the south.
Okay.
As I indicated before, what I'm not too keen about is the overall paving of the easternmost part of the site. But I can see us holding some of the dirt on that corner there, which will be the southeast corner as is shown on option three, and maybe save a couple of dollars, but I like the concept under option one.
Okay, thank you very much, Trustee Martinez.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please, Trustee Page.
And I agree with Trustee Martinez. I like the additional parking for guests and employees in option 1, but I don't see a problem with leaving a stockpile of topsoil in the back eastern corner of the property.
Okay, thank you.
Financing wise, I'm leaning toward option 1 versus taking on additional debt.
Okay.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please, Trustee Krusek.
Yeah, I also am in favor of option 1. It was, for me, it was between 1 or 3. When you look at the pros and cons that we were looking at there, option 2 had a whole lot of red checks on what wasn't necessarily going to work well. So I guess it came down to, do I want more flexibility with option 3 or not worry about potential price inflation with option 1? Do I want to spend whatever this might end up being? No, not necessarily, but I think we've come too far and we're at a point now where we just have to do something. And I don't think that waiting even longer is going to help anything as far as cost or just the safety of the people that are working in the building now. So I'm going to go with option 1, and I can go with either option 1 or 1A, but I think at this point in time, I would probably agree with Trustee Page and not necessarily look to commit at this point anyway on additional debt for the village.
Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, please, Trustee Blair.
I also prefer option 1. And right now I would probably go with option 1, but I like the idea of reevaluating that Nadine suggested, just to kind of look at it again. I guess I do have one question on that.
Oh, sure, please.
On the bonds, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, because if you did, you would be doing something much different. How much time do you think we have before the interest rates are going to be impacted negatively? How much time do we have to think about this?
I'm actually going to let Anthony from Spear speak to that because he's my crystal ball.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's not an easy question to answer. I'll say that rates already have started to come up just this year. We saw the end of last year just be really incredible for how low interest rates were all the way through February of this year. Now the 10-year treasury is at 1.6%, which historically is still unbelievably low. But when you look at it relative to where it was just a month ago or 2 months ago, things have started to come up. I'm hopeful that we'll level off a bit, but if the economy starts to come back post-COVID, I can see a case for rates potentially starting to come up at the end of this year, but I don't know what that looks like. It's been so unpredictable.
So it's in our best interest to do something sooner rather than later.
It's a bird in the hand situation a bit, and that was, Nadine's thought on getting these longer bonds issued now. You're going to hedge against future rates, because if rates do go up, that's going to impact you a lot less on the short term versus these 25-year bonds that are going to be hanging out there for a long period of time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blair. Trustee Abbott.
Yeah, I wanted to fix up the old building, so it doesn't really matter what I say. I think everybody's kind of agreed around option 1. So, but I would say that if we're going with option 1, let's put money down now rather than putting it all in bonds. If we can't afford even a modest down payment on this, then we shouldn't be doing the building.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Trustee Abbott. So I know this is not an easy decision. However, I must say that we have put in extensive time and The work that has gone into this is incredible. And I thank each of you for sharing all of your time, your insight, and diligence. This is a extremely long planning, process that we have gone through. It has been conscientious, diligent, thorough, studied, thoughtful. I mean, I could go on because truly some of us have been working on this for over 10 years. And getting to this point of actually picking an option this evening is something I'm very proud of our board and very proud for our community, as well as everyone at the village and everyone who has helped us get to this point. I believe that we have one goal, and that is having a very safe community. And, that has been always a driving factor for us. There's many other things that go along with it, but that has always been one of the lead motivations for us in doing this. So, I do want to share, because I think it's important, that I am also in favor of option 1, the full development. I agree about looking at the financing part a little bit further and kind of talking through, because we have an option, 1 or 1A, or, something else that may come about after tonight's information that has been shared and all the questions that have been asked or will be forthcoming. So I'm going to ask our administrator if there is anything that you need from us further at this time. Do you have enough from everyone?
We sure do, Mayor. Thank you to you and the board for the direction tonight. That has been very helpful. I know it's a big decision, but it will provide very clear direction for our team here to proceed ahead.
Well, thank you so much. And, as I said, we do this all working together. We thank you very much for the presentation this evening. There may be future discussions that will take place as we move forward, going through the project and the process that we have before us. And I'm sure we will have many more discussions on top of the financing, but I know you will lead us through all of that. Is there anything else that we need this evening, Administrator Stonich?
No, Mayor, just that what we intend to do as a team here is come back roughly, every 3 months or so and provide an update to you, have our team come back in this kind of formal setting and share with you what milestones we've achieved and kind of where we are on the schedule and on budget, and then what major milestones are ahead. So please do expect that on a more formal basis, roughly every 3 months.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Anything else from any board members? Again, thank you very much. Anything else from any of our presenters here this evening? Again.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We so appreciate all the excellent works and the teamwork. And, as we are prudently excited about moving forward and what this means to our community, we thank you for being outstanding partners in our effort. And we look forward to working together with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there is nothing further to come before the village board to discuss this evening, I would like to ask for a motion, please, to adjourn our meeting.
So move, Trustee Krusek.
Thank you, Trustee Krusek. And a second, please.
Second, Trustee Blair.
Thank you, Trustee Blair. The time is 8:09 p.m. and we are going to go ahead and adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Hearing no one. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Appreciate everyone.